Up next in the broadcast, a boat ride to Korea's resort island of Jeju-do turns deadly after hundreds of passengers, mostly students on a school tour, found themselves on a sinking ship after a loud bang. Seoul and Tokyo hold their first working-level talks to resolve Japan's wartime atrocity of sexual slavery. But despite some reports of a possible shift in Japan's position, pundits say one meeting may not be enough. And Russian President Vladimir Putin says Ukraine may be on the brink of civil war as Ukraine's armed forces mobilize to eliminate pro-Russian forces in Ukrainian territory. Primetime News begins now.
Welcome to Primetime News. It's Wednesday, April 16th here in Seoul, and I'm Choi Yoo-sun.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We start off with the sinking of a passenger ferry off the southwestern coast of Korea earlier on Wednesday.
There were over 460 people on board, about 320 of which were students traveling with several teachers to the resort island of Jeju. The Coast Guard has confirmed at least 4 deaths so far. And we have our Park Ji-won in the studio to give us more details about the accident. Ji-won?
Hi, the Seoul ferry started to sink at around 9 a.m. this morning, some 20 kilometers off the coast of Jeju-do Island in southwestern Korea. At least 4 people have been confirmed dead so far, including a ferry employee Park Ji-young in her 20s and a male high schooler who was on board because of the school trip, and 2 others who have not yet been identified. So far, the number of people rescued stands at 174, with the remaining 280 or so people still missing, and the search operation is still going on.
And earlier in the day, we did hear from the president saying that all of the rescue operations should be finished by sundown. Of course, it's much well after that. How are rescue operations going now?
Well, the government is in all-out efforts to save people's lives, and President Park Geun-hye and Defense Minister Kim Kwan-jin have ordered that all Navy and Coast Guard and nearby vessels help with the efforts. Dozens of ships and 18 aircrafts, along with hundreds of specialized forces and scuba divers, are actively searching for survivors. However, rescue operations are getting more difficult as the night goes on. However, the Coast Guard said it will keep searching for survivors.
Ji-won, give us some details about the time when the ferry actually started to sink.
Well, the survivors say it was around 8:30 that the ferry decided to set off, and it wasn't long after that the passengers heard a loud bang sound, and the ship suddenly started to tilt by 60 or 70 degrees. And let's listen to what survivors say about the moment.
I screamed for 30 to 40 minutes in the ferry. Things were falling and people were sliding down the ship.
The waves were calm when the ferry set off. Then all of a sudden the ship felt like it flipped on its side violently. People were cornered and they couldn't get out of their cabins because they couldn't open the doors. The ship tilted by 60 degrees and slowly inclined to 90 degrees before capsizing, and that was when I was rescued.
Well, Ji-won, considering that this happened earlier in the day and with all of the rescue forces, the ships, the helicopters, all of them rushing to the scene, the number of missing people still seems quite high. I hear that there have been criticisms about announcements in the ship telling passengers to stay where they were. How did that contribute to the situation now?
Yes, the survivors say they were instructed to stay indoors, and the announcement kept going on, and that seems to have caused more people trapped in their cabins. And the Coast Guard said there is high possibility that the passengers may have gotten trapped when the power was cut off after the ship suddenly tilted.
Well, earlier in the day, the reported number of people rescued was much higher, giving hopes to families and the entire nation. Why was there a sudden change of that figure?
Well, up until 3 in this afternoon, The number of missing people were known to be around 100 and less than that, but the government had a briefing at 4 p.m. saying the actual number of missing people were at nearly 300, much higher than the earlier figure because there were errors in counting the rescued. About 200 people were double counted, causing the confusion in the figure, and let's take a look.
The reason for the confusion in the number of rescued people, the reason it was revised down from the earlier figure of 368 to the current 164, is because some of those who were rescued were counted twice.
So, are there any indications on what caused the accident?
Well, we don't know any clear confirmed facts as of now, but we should note that the ferry was driven by a backup captain, and the original captain was on vacation, and the ship set off later than its expected schedule due to heavy fog. So the substitute captain changed the ship's route to try and arrive at the destination, Jeju Island, on time. And we also note that the sinking site was known to be filled with rocks. So let's listen to what an expert, Jung Yeon-chul, professor of the navigation science, Korea Maritime and Ocean University, has to say about this.
I think the highest possible reason for the sinking is its crashing into unidentified rocks. The site of the accident is pretty close to the shore, so I believe unidentified rocks may have caused the sinking. We can also suspect other reasons for the cause of the accident, like an explosion inside the ship. That might have caused the sinking.
And officials say the next step of the recovery will be the use of 3 giant floating cranes to begin lifting the vessel.
All right, Jiwon, thank you for that report, and do keep us updated in our next newscast.
Korea and Japan have held their first working-level talks on the so-called comfort women issue. The two sides met in Seoul late Wednesday to try to resolve their differences.
But as our Hwang Sang-hee tells us, it will take much more than one meeting to mend decades of sour ties.
Senior officials from Korea and Japan met in Seoul Wednesday as they seek to resolve the long-standing dispute over Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Following 2 hours of talks, a South Korean official who wished to remain anonymous told reporters that the two sides exchanged their basic stances and held a productive discussion. Korea has been demanding an official apology and legal compensation from Japan for the so-called comfort women. Tokyo claims the issue was settled through a 1965 treaty signed by the two neighbors when they normalized diplomatic ties. The rare meeting is the result of an agreement reached ahead of President Park Geun-hye's first official talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in the Netherlands last month. But just one round of talks was not enough for the two sides to overcome decades of diplomatic tensions. The officials will meet again in May, when Japan hosts a second round of discussions on the comfort women issue, and perhaps even more.
I believe there are many issues that Korea and Japan need to exchange views on.
Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese army in comfort stations during the early 20th century. When asked whether the officials will discuss a possible summit between South Korea and Japan at their next meeting, the South Korean official did not give a clear answer, but said that the two sides must first build mutual trust. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
April's first plenary session opened this Wednesday with lawmakers passing Korea's long-awaited defense cost-sharing pact with the U.S.
Over in Washington, high-level officials from the two countries discussed the timing of the U.S. handing over the wartime operational control to Korea. Our Ji Myung-gil reports.
The ruling and opposition parties came together to pass a number of long-pending bills this Wednesday at the National Assembly. After months of gridlock, lawmakers passed the revised Defense Cost-Sharing Pact with the U.S. Seoul and Washington had agreed in January to renew the Special Measures Agreement that lays out the cost each side pays for the 28,500 U.S. troops stationed on South Korean soil. Under the deal, South Korea will pay some $880 million annually from this year through 2018, a 5.8% increase from its share last year. Approval of the pact was delayed over concerns that it requires Seoul to pay more than is necessary. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy had expressed the most concern, wondering aloud whether Washington would divert some of Seoul's share of the money to finance the relocation of a U.S. military base in the country. The ratified bill will go into effect after being signed by President Park Geun-hye. Over in Washington, South Korea and the U.S. opened a high-level military meeting at the Pentagon on Tuesday local time, with North Korea and pending alliance issues topping the agenda. The two-day integrated defense dialogue began with Seoul requesting for another delay in the transfer of wartime operational control from the U.S. to South Korea. Seoul is currently scheduled to regain wartime operational control in 2015, but the government says the nation's military needs more time to prepare for the transfer. The two sides have reportedly agreed in principle on a delay due to the ongoing threat posed by North Korea, but the exact timing and other details are still being ironed out. The two allies will sit down with Japan for defense trilateral talks starting Thursday. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
The top nuclear envoys of China and the United States have wrapped up their second day of discussions in New York on ways to resume the long-stalled six-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea.
Both sides are playing their cards close to their chest in regards to the details, but Washington says the dialogue has been productive. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
Chinese nuclear envoy Wu Da-wei and his U.S. counterpart Glenn Davies met for the second time this week to discuss ways to lure North Korea back to the six-party talks on its own denuclearization. In a statement Tuesday, the U.S. State Department said the talks had been productive and both sides had agreed on the fundamental importance of a denuclearized North Korea. The Chinese delegate did not comment about the closed-door meeting. Diplomatic sources in the United Nations were paying close attention to whether Wu would propose an arbitration plan on the human rights issue in North Korea. Pyongyang threatened to conduct a fourth nuclear test if the international community crossed the line by bringing up the regime's human rights abuses. The Chinese delegation spent 5 days in Pyongyang last month and has reportedly drawn up an arbitration plan that contains the North Korean stance on the matter. Wu and Davies will hold the third and last meeting in Washington. The meeting comes as Beijing's foreign ministry issued a rare statement Tuesday, saying it's opposed to any move that may result in tensions in the region, whether they be joint drills between South Korea and the U.S. or North Korea's threat of conducting further nuclear tests. It also urged all related parties to make joint efforts to ease the situation and said China would continue to play a positive role in promoting peace and stability in the region. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Rigorous spending aimed at revitalizing the local economy was on the mind of Korea's top economic policymaker during a regular meeting on this Wednesday.
Our economics correspondent Na Hyung-kyung reports on how the government plans to pump more of this year's budget into the first half.
Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok says the government will accelerate its rate of spending in the first half of the year to help boost Korea's economy and make people actually feel the effects of improving economic conditions.
Second quarter spending will be expanded to exceed the original first half of the year guideline of 55%. The money will be spent with a special focus on supporting the nation's small and mid-sized firms, so that 60% of the year's budget allocated for the finance sector is used in the first half of the year.
The government executed 24% of its finance budget in the January to March period. That's slightly below its target of 28%. The finance minister is now pushing to spend what was left over in the first quarter, plus more than its 27% target for the second quarter. Hyun, while stressing Korea's economy is on a path of moderate recovery, emphasized that external uncertainties such as the U.S. stimulus scale back and the slowdown in the Chinese economy should be closely monitored, and he also pledged to spur domestic investment. The government will continue to make sure its $28 billion investment project is run as planned throughout the year. The project consists of 19 tasks aimed at easing regulations on restricted properties and utilizing them to secure investment, for example, for building company towns and special economic zones. 나현경, Arirang News.
As a means to boosting employment, small and mid-sized Korean companies that create more full-time jobs will be exempt from an annual tax audit. The National Tax Service says that the incentive will be for companies with revenue of less than $28 million and particularly for those hiring young people. The government on Tuesday also unveiled a set of measures to tackle the nation's low youth employment rate, which stood at 39.7% last year, far below the OECD nation's average of 50%. Companies will have their benefits removed if there's any sign of tax evasion.
And speaking of employment, Korea's biggest companies say they're committed to hiring more women, but the data suggests otherwise. According to analysis of regulatory filings from Korea's top 20 companies, female workers accounted for just 17% of their workforce last year, up just 3 percentage points from a decade earlier. At some companies like Samsung Electronics and LG Display, the ratio of female workers even dropped. The data indicates that internet-based firms appear to be more apt to hire women than manufacturing companies.
Now to check on stories making headlines on the global front, from the launch of an anti-terror operation in Ukraine to the mass abduction of students in Nigeria. We go live to our Paul Lee at the News Center.
Paul, let's start with Ukraine. Kiev appears to be pushing back pro-Russian groups in the eastern part of the country. What are the latest developments?
Well, Ukraine's acting President Alexander Turchinov said Tuesday that special forces have retaken a military airfield in the eastern town of Kramatorsk. Authorities say it marks the first formal military action by Kiev against pro-Russian militants that have occupied government buildings in the 10 eastern regions this past week. Witnesses say Ukrainian troops, helicopters, and several armored personnel carriers have been deployed to other key flashpoints. Despite reports of gunfire, there have been no confirmed casualties. Pro-Russian separatists have taken over the mayor's office in the city of Donetsk and remain in control of a building in Slavyansk. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has condemned Kiev for the latest military operation, saying Ukraine is on the brink of civil war. Moscow has urged against using any force ahead of four-way talks on Thursday between diplomats from Russia, the EU, the U.S., and Ukraine. Meanwhile, NATO says it will deploy more planes, ships, and land defenses in Eastern Europe in response to the crisis in Ukraine. And turning now to China, where official data released Wednesday showed the Chinese economy grew 7.4% in the January to March quarter compared to the same period a year earlier. That's slightly higher than market expectations, but it still represents the slowest growth rate in 18 months for the world's second largest economy. But authorities have rolled out any major stimulus measures in order to fight what they called short-term dips. A spokesman for China's National Statistics Bureau said the Q1 growth stayed within a reasonable range and showed the domestic economy still faces downward pressure. Economists, meanwhile, are split over Beijing's economic outlook. Some analysts say China's GDP growth will continue to lose momentum through 2014 unless the government takes greater steps to stabilize the economy. And lastly, let's focus on Nigeria. President Goodluck Jonathan has blamed the Islamic militant group Boko Haram for a series of kidnappings and violent attacks ripping through Africa's most populous country. As many as 200 teenage girls were abducted by heavily armed men late Monday night at a boarding school in the state of Borno. Suspected Boko Haram gunmen engaged in a firefight with soldiers guarding the school, killing 2, before loading the girls into trucks, vans, and buses. Earlier in the day, a massive bomb exploded at a bus station in the capital city of Abuja. The rush hour blast has killed at least 71 people and wounded 124 others. Officials say Boko Haram fighters have killed more than 1,500 civilians this year alone. That wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. The Sochi figure skating controversy continues. The International Skating Union, or ISU, has received South Korea's complaint and will decide what to do with it within 3 weeks. The Korea Skating Union, in their formal protest, targeted not the results of the competition, in which Kim Yeon-ah won the silver medal, but the makeup of the free skate judging panel, which they say violated the ISU's ethics rules. The global skating body will now decide whether to handle the case themselves or hand it over to the Court of Arbitration for Sport in the next few weeks. And heading to the U.S., the Boston Marathon bombing marked its one-year anniversary, with thousands paying their respects. Light rain fell as people gathered at the memorial, held near the finish line on Boylston Street, to hold a moment of silence for the victims. There, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden was on hand to share words of inspiration with the mourning city. But of his remarks, none rang louder than when he declared, "You are Boston strong," adding the whole country was proud of their resilience. And meanwhile, in the MLB, the league celebrated Jackie Robinson Day to honor the man who broke the professional baseball's color barrier 67 years ago. As per tradition, all of the players wore Robinson's number 42 in their games on Tuesday in the U.S. The number has been retired since 1997. On April 15, 1947, the then Brooklyn Dodgers started Robinson at first base, toppling nearly 7 decades of segregation in the league. And moving on to the NBA hardcore, the Los Angeles Clippers earned their franchise record 57th win after beating the Denver Nuggets 117-105. Star point guard Chris Paul had a 21-point, 10-assist double-double, with Blake Griffin contributing 24 points. They broke the record that they set last year. Also, it's the first time the Clippers earned 3 playoff appearances in a row since the team moved to LA in 1984. Now it's time for Wednesday's top KBL matchup. The Tusan Bears faced off against the Samsung Lions in Daegu. Now we fast forward to the second inning. This is where Tusan's Kim Jae-ho, he drives in the first run, and another run is added in the third before we see Hong Sung-eun come up to the plate and hit this homer, sparking a 2-run fourth. It's 4-0 Tusan. Now in the sixth, it's Hong again. He drives it over, this time the right field wall. The Bears' Dustin Nippert, he comes out after 8 strikeouts in 7 innings of work, and the team goes on to win with a final score of 5-0. And looking at the other games, we have Hanwha beating Kia 8-4. Next over LG 5-2, and NC and Lotte are still battling it out in the ninth. It's 7-7. Now that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
Rescue operations over at Jeju-do for the submerged ferry will get more difficult with showers and strong winds forecast tomorrow. And here in Seoul, residents suffered through thick toxic dust where an ultra-fine dust warning was issued.
For more, we connect live to our Kim Bo-kyung standing at the Weather Center. Hi, Bo-kyung.
Well, guys, making matters worse, tomorrow rain will fall on Jeju-do, and that will be accompanied by strong winds blowing at 8 meters per second. Also, the tide will be at 2.5 meters, which is about 1.5 meters higher than today. Here in the capital, as of 5 p.m., an ultra-fine dust warning was issued. Currently, Seoul is seeing 181 micrograms per cubic meter, which is about 4 times the normal level. Chuncheon is at 182 micrograms, and Ulsan City is seeing about 131 micrograms, so children and the elderly should refrain from doing outdoor activities. Currently, the nation is at the edge of a high-pressure system, which is why we're seeing cloudy skies down south. Through later tonight, Jeju will get about 5 millimeters of precipitation. Tomorrow, showers will spread to most parts of the country, with Jeolla, Namdo, and Gyeongsangdo provinces forecast to get between 10 to 40 millimeters. Elsewhere, the central regions can expect less than 5 millimeters. The showers will add some much-needed moisture to the dry air. On to Thursday's readings, Seoul tops out at 22 degrees, while Gwangju and Busan hit 17 and 19. Moving on to other regions, Jeju reaches 21 degrees, while Dokdo and Kumgang make it to 13 and 10. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Bo-kyung. And those are the stories we're following at this hour. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Join us again for the latest on the ongoing rescue operation for the sunken ship off of Korea's southwestern coast on our next newscast at midnight, Korea time.